Welcome to Compact Warfare from CompactHistories.com, the show where we explore key moments from the history of conflict, from ancient battlefields to modern warfare. Before we start, a quick announcement. A brand new podcast has joined the Compact Histories family. It's called Compact Science, and it brings you clear, straightforward explanations of science-related topics, all in the same short, bite-sized format. Look out for Compact Science wherever you get your podcasts and on CompactHistories.com, available now. With that being said, let's get back to the show. This is episode 70, the Battle of Britain. By the summer of 1940, Britain faced one of the darkest moments in its history. In less than a year, Nazi Germany had overturned the balance of power in Europe with startling speed. Poland had been invaded in September 1939, prompting Britain and France to declare war, but the months that followed produced little major action on the Western Front. That uneasy period ended in April and May 1940, when Germany launched a series of fast-moving offensives that stunned its enemies and reshaped the war. Denmark fell in April, and on the 10th of May 1940, German forces attacked Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. Norway held on before falling in June. The German campaign in the West relied on speed, surprise, and coordination between tanks, aircraft, and infantry. While Allied commanders expected a repeat of the trench warfare of 1914 to 1918, German forces pushed through the Ardennes, a region the French had not considered suitable for a major armoured assault. This manoeuvre allowed the Wehrmacht to outflank the Maginot Line and drive rapidly toward the English Channel. British and French troops advanced into Belgium, only to find themselves threatened with encirclement. In a matter of weeks, the Allied position in Western Europe began to collapse. The British Expeditionary Force, sent to France to support the Allies, was soon trapped alongside French and Belgian units near the port of Dunkirk. Between the 26th of May and the 4th of June 1940, Britain carried out Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of troops across the Channel. More than 338,000 Allied soldiers were rescued, including around 198,000 British troops and roughly 140,000 French and Belgian personnel. The operation saved the core of Britain's trained army, but it was not a victory in the normal sense. Vast quantities of equipment, including artillery, vehicles, and supplies, had to be abandoned on the beaches and in the fields of northern France. The political situation in Britain was also shifting dramatically. On the 10th of May 1940, the very day Germany attacked in the West, Neville Chamberlain resigned as Prime Minister and Winston Churchill took his place. Churchill inherited a country facing military disaster and deep uncertainty. France, Britain's principal ally on the continent, was collapsing. Paris fell to German forces on June 14th, and the French government signed an armistice on the 22nd of June 1940. Italy had also entered the war against Britain and France on June 10th, further increasing the pressure. Britain now stood alone against a Germany that dominated most of Western and Central Europe. Hitler had not yet defeated Britain, but he had removed nearly every major obstacle between the Third Reich and the Channel coast. For the first time in centuries, the threat of invasion appeared real. The question was no longer whether Britain was in danger, but how it would survive the storm that was coming. After the fall of France in June 1940, Britain had only a short time to prepare for the next phase of the war. If Germany intended to invade across the English Channel, it would first need to weaken or destroy the Royal Air Force. Control of the skies was essential for any amphibious landing, particularly one as risky as the proposed Operation Sea Lion. Britain, therefore, faced an urgent task, not simply to replace aircraft and pilots lost in France, but to organize a defensive system capable of detecting, tracking, and defeating a major air assault. The strength of that system would become one of the decisive factors of the Battle of Britain. At the center of Britain's air defense stood RAF Fighter Command, led by Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding. Dowding had spent the years before the war arguing for a modern integrated system of defense built not just on aircraft, but on information. By 1940, Fighter Command was divided into 4 operational groups, covering different parts of the country. Number 11 Group, commanded by Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, defended southeast England and would bear the brunt of the coming battle. Number 12 Group covered the Midlands and East Anglia. Number 10 Group protected the southwest, and Number 13 Group was responsible for northern England and Scotland. This structure allowed Britain to respond to attacks regionally rather than wasting fighter strength in constant, wide-ranging patrols. One of the most important elements of Dowding's system was radar. Britain had developed a chain of radar stations along the coast known as Chain Home, with additional lower-level stations to detect aircraft flying at reduced altitude. These stations could identify incoming German raids while they were still some distance from the coast, giving valuable warning time. Radar alone, however, was not enough. Information from radar, the Royal Observer Corps, and other sources was fed into a central reporting network, filtered and passed on to group and sector headquarters. From there, controllers could direct squadrons to the right place at the right time. This meant that Fighter Command did not need to keep large numbers of aircraft in the air searching blindly for the enemy. It could conserve fuel, reduce pilot fatigue, and launch fighters only when needed. Britain's main fighter aircraft in 1940 were the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. The Hurricane, though less glamorous than the Spitfire, made up a large part of Fighter Command's strength and was sturdy, reliable, and easier to produce and repair. The Spitfire was faster and highly maneuverable, making it particularly effective against German fighters such as the Messerschmitt Bf-109. Together, the two aircraft formed the backbone of Britain's defence. Pilots were another matter. Aircraft production rose steadily during the summer of 1940, but trained pilots were harder to replace. Losses could not be made good as quickly as factories could build machines. Britain's defensive shield was therefore a combination of technology, organisation, industry, and human endurance. It was not perfect, and it would be tested severely in the months ahead. But by July 1940, Britain had built something Germany did not fully understand: a coordinated air defence network that could turn limited resources into a formidable barrier. That shield was about to face its first sustained assault. In July 1940, the Battle of Britain entered its opening phase. Germany had defeated France and now faced the narrow strip of water that separated the Third Reich from its last major enemy in Western Europe. Before any invasion could take place, the Luftwaffe needed to reduce Britain's ability to resist from the air. Yet the first weeks of the battle were not marked by one sudden all-out assault. Instead, they consisted of probing attacks, reconnaissance flights, and mounting pressure along the Channel coast, as German commanders tried to assess the strength and weaknesses of RAF Fighter Command. The Luftwaffe was under the command of Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, who promised that German air power could defeat Britain quickly. The force available to him was large and experienced. It included medium bombers such as the Heinkel HE-111, the Dornier DO-17, and the Junkers Ju-88, as well as the Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, which had been highly effective in earlier campaigns. Escort and fighter cover came primarily from the Messerschmitt Bf-109, Germany's principal single-seat fighter, and the longer-range but less successful Bf-110 heavy fighter. On paper, the Luftwaffe seemed formidable. Its crews had gained combat experience in Spain, Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, and France. Many German commanders assumed that Britain would soon be brought to the brink in much the same way. The problem for Germany was that Britain could not be attacked in exactly the same way as countries on the continent. The English Channel imposed operational limits, especially on fighter escorts. The Bf-109 had excellent performance, but its range was limited. German fighters could not remain over southern England for long before needing to return to bases in occupied France and Belgium. This restricted the time available to protect bombers and reduced German flexibility during combat. Britain, by contrast, was fighting over home territory. RAF pilots who survived being shot down often returned to action, while German aircrew lost over Britain were more likely to be killed or captured. During July, German attacks focused heavily on shipping in the Channel and on the ports and coastal targets linked to Britain's supply lines. This period became known as the Kanalkampf, or Channel Battle. Convoys moving through the Dover Strait and other southern waters were bombed and strafed in an effort to draw RAF fighters into combat. The Luftwaffe hoped to wear down fighter command bit by bit, forcing British squadrons into repeated action under difficult conditions. These attacks were not merely harassment. They were intended to test Britain's response times, examine the effectiveness of radar-guided interception, and identify which sectors of the defence system were most vulnerable. The results were mixed. German aircraft inflicted losses on shipping and caused disruption, but they did not cripple Britain's coastal traffic. More importantly, the attacks revealed that fighter command could not be drawn out and destroyed as easily as expected. British controllers continued to direct squadrons efficiently, and RAF fighters remained a persistent obstacle. The Channel fighting was therefore a rehearsal for the greater struggle to come, a period in which the Luftwaffe tested Britain's defences and discovered that the shield it faced was stronger than it had assumed. By early August 1940, the Luftwaffe was ready to move beyond probing attacks and convoy raids. German planners now focused on the central objective of the campaign, the destruction of RAF fighter command. Without that, Operation Sea Lion, the proposed invasion of Britain, could not go ahead with any real chance of success. The Germans needed to win air superiority over southern England, drive British fighters from the sky, and cripple the system that supported them on the ground. The result was a more concentrated and dangerous phase of the battle, marked by larger raids and mounting pressure on airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. The Germans gave this main assault the codename Adlerangriff, meaning eagle attack. Its intended opening blow, Adlertag, or Eagle Day, was set for the 13th of August 1940, though bad weather and confusion in communications affected operations. Even so, the Luftwaffe launched major attacks against a range of British targets. Airfields used by fighter command, radar sites along the coast, and sectors connected to aircraft production all came under pressure. The goal was not random damage. Germany wanted to tear apart the carefully organised system that allowed Dowding's command structure to function. If radar could be blinded, sector stations wrecked, and fighters destroyed on the ground or in the air, Britain's defensive network might collapse. At the centre of the British response remained No. 11 Group under Keith Park, defending the southeast of England. This was the part of the country closest to German bases in northern France, and therefore the most exposed. Park's squadrons were scrambled again and again to intercept incoming raids, often under severe strain. The pressure was relentless. Pilots flew multiple sorties in a day, ground crews worked at exhausting speed to refuel and rearm aircraft, and sector controllers had to make rapid decisions with little margin for error. This was no longer a matter of occasional clashes over the Channel. It had become a sustained contest of endurance, organisation, and nerve. German strategy during this phase reflected both strength and misunderstanding. The Luftwaffe possessed large numbers of aircraft and could mount repeated attacks, but it often failed to appreciate how resilient the British defensive system was. Radar stations were attacked but not permanently disabled. Airfields were bombed, yet not all the targets selected were the most critical to fighter command survival. In some cases, the Germans struck bomber bases or less vital installations, while the key sector stations continued operating. The RAF suffered serious losses, and the strain on pilots and aircraft was severe, but the system itself did not break. The fighting in mid and late August became some of the most intense of the entire campaign. On the 15th of August, the Luftwaffe attacked from several directions, including from Norway and Denmark as well as France and the Low Countries, believing that British defences in the north would be weaker. Instead, German forces encountered stronger resistance than expected and suffered heavy losses. Then, on the 18th of August, often called the hardest day, both sides paid a high price in aircraft and aircrew. Airfields such as Kenley and Biggin Hill were hit hard, but the RAF managed to stay in the fight. By the end of August, fighter command was under real strain, especially in the southeast, but it was still operational. The Luftwaffe had failed to destroy it outright. Germany had come closer than Britain's wartime mythology sometimes admits, yet not close enough. The struggle for air superiority was still unresolved, and the battle was about to enter its most famous and politically charged phase. In late August and early September 1940, the Battle of Britain entered a new and decisive phase. The Luftwaffe had spent weeks attacking convoys, coastal targets, radar stations, and above all the airfields and sector stations of RAF Fighter Command. These attacks had placed the British defence system under severe pressure, particularly in southeast England. Airfields such as Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, North Weald and Kenley had suffered repeated damage. Pilots were exhausted, and replacement crews often arrived with limited experience. For a moment, Germany seemed close to achieving the disruption it needed. Yet at precisely this point, the direction of the campaign began to change. One reason for that shift was political as well as military. On the night of the 24th to the 25th of August 1940, German bombs fell on parts of London, apparently during a raid aimed at other targets. Whether accidental or not, the attack had major consequences. In response, the RAF carried out a bombing raid on Berlin on the night of the 25th to the 26th of August. The material damage was limited, but the symbolic impact was significant. Hitler had promised that enemy bombers would not reach Germany's capital, and the raid caused embarrassment. Göring had likewise assured the German public that the Luftwaffe could prevent such attacks. Hitler now demanded retaliation, and the German air offensive increasingly turned toward London. This change in target selection altered the nature of the battle. Instead of focusing primarily on Fighter Command's airfields and control network, the Luftwaffe began to strike the capital on a large scale. On the 7th of September 1940, German bombers and fighters launched a massive daylight attack on London's docks in the East End. Hundreds of aircraft took part, fires burned across the docklands, warehouses were destroyed, and civilians were killed in large numbers. This attack marked the opening of what became known as the Blitz, the sustained bombing campaign against London and later other British cities. Although the Blitz would continue far beyond the formal end of the Battle of Britain, its beginning was directly tied to this change in German strategy. For Britain, the shift brought both danger and relief. The attacks on London were devastating for civilians and caused huge material destruction, but they also gave Fighter Command a critical breathing space. The pressure on sector stations and fighter airfields eased just enough for damaged infrastructure to be repaired, squadrons to be reorganized, and exhausted units to recover. German bombers heading for London could still be intercepted, and because the target was so obvious, British controllers often had a clearer idea of where to direct their fighters. In trying to punish Britain and break civilian morale, the Luftwaffe had stepped away from the more focused strategy that had come closest to weakening the RAF. The most famous test of this new phase came on the 15th of September 1940. On that day, the Luftwaffe mounted major daylight raids against London, expecting to overwhelm British resistance. Instead, RAF fighters rose in force and inflicted serious losses. The scale of the British response convinced German leaders that Fighter Command had not been defeated after all. In the days that followed, it became increasingly clear that Germany had failed to gain the air superiority needed for invasion. The Blitz would continue, and the suffering of British cities was far from over, but the battle for control of the skies was slipping out of German hands. By mid-September 1940, the Battle of Britain had reached its turning point. Germany had failed to destroy RAF Fighter Command, and without control of the skies, the proposed invasion of Britain could not be launched with any realistic hope of success. The campaign did not end in one dramatic instant, but the strategic outcome was becoming clear. The Luftwaffe continued to bomb London and other cities, and the Blitz would intensify through the autumn and winter. Yet the original objective of the air campaign had not been achieved. Britain remained in the war, uninvaded, and still capable of resisting. One of the most important dates in this final phase was the 17th of September 1940. On that day, Adolf Hitler ordered the postponement of Operation Sea Lion. The invasion was not formally cancelled at once, but in practical terms, it was shelved indefinitely. Germany had not gained the air superiority needed to protect troop transports, landing forces, and supply lines across the Channel. The Royal Navy also remained a major threat, but without dominance in the air, the risks became even greater. Hitler turned his attention elsewhere. and although Britain would continue to face bombing, blockade, and the danger of future attack, the immediate threat of a German landing receded. The Battle of Britain was therefore the first major campaign of the Second World War in which Nazi Germany was clearly checked and denied its objective. That mattered militarily, politically, and psychologically. Throughout 1939 and 1940, German forces had achieved a string of dramatic victories. Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, and France had all fallen with shocking speed. Britain's survival broke that pattern. It showed that Germany could be resisted and that the war would not be won quickly. This had consequences far beyond the British Isles. A free Britain remained as a base for continued resistance, a centre of Allied planning, and later the launching point for the liberation of Western Europe. The battle also became one of the defining stories of modern Britain. Winston Churchill captured its emotional force in a speech to the House of Commons on the 20th of August 1940 when he declared, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." He was referring to the RAF fighter pilots and aircrew who bore the heaviest burden in the battle, though the phrase soon came to symbolize the wider effort as well. Fighter pilots became national heroes, but victory had depended on far more than those in the cockpit. It rested on ground crews, radar operators, factory workers, planners, and the civilians who endured the strain of bombing and invasion fears. The Battle of Britain also shaped the course of the wider war. Because Britain remained unconquered in 1940, it could continue fighting until the conflict broadened further. In June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, opening the vast Eastern Front. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States fully into the war. Britain's survival in 1940 ensured that Germany would face powerful enemies on multiple fronts, rather than consolidating victory in the West. The battle did not win the war by itself, but it prevented defeat at a moment when defeat seemed dangerously possible. In memory and myth, the Battle of Britain has often been simplified into a tale of clear-cut heroism and tidy victory. The reality was harsher, more complex, and far more fragile. Britain was under intense strain, fighter command came under real pressure, and the outcome was not inevitable. Yet that is precisely why the battle remains so significant. It was a victory won not through overwhelming strength, but through preparation, coordination, endurance, and the refusal to yield when much of Europe had already fallen. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Warfare, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactwarfare.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, mysteries, and true crime. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/warfarecoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.